Okay, yes. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the GSDC Global Generative AI in Risk and Compliance webinar sessions. My name is Anjali, and I am your host for today. Joining me is my colleague, Ms. Setalu. So if you need any assistance during this session, you can please do reach out to her. Yeah, just give me a second. My screen is stuck. Yes. So we had generative AI risk and compliance sessions with these amazing speakers, that is David, Campbell, Entry, and Resak. So post this webinar session, you can check the full recordings on our YouTube channel. For today's session, we have Mr. Richard Lawn presenting us today on the topic of generative AI navigating emerging regulations. So stay connected with us till the end to hear out some amazing insights and content on generative AI presented today. Let me introduce you our hosting organization, that is GSDC. GSDC is a vendor-neutral, vendor-agnostic, globally recognized certification body. GSDC is being recognized in Forbes and TechTarget as one of the top IT certifications. We are proud to say that we are accredited by NC and ABI-CB. We have 100 plus certification portfolio. We have successfully certified 90,000 plus professionals worldwide. GSTC has 500 plus advisory board of members who are also our subject matter experts. They work closely with our team and help to design our deliverables. We are associated with 1,000 plus MNC corporates and 30 plus universities worldwide. So if you need more information about our website, our council, so link is shared in the chat box. We have over 100 plus authorized training partners associated with us globally. That is, we have these partners in Asia, Africa, Canada, and many more countries. Thank you everyone to those who are joining this session through our partner channel. If you like to connect our partners, the link is shared in the chat box. Also, a big shout out to our proud patrons for sharing these knowledgeable events with their network. And thank you as always for your support. Thank you very much, World Press Hub, our official media partner, for covering our social media events. As mentioned earlier to you that we have 100+ certification portfolio. So such as generative AI certifications, we have blockchain, ISO, you can say agile, and many more certifications. So for this, for this session, we are focusing on generative AI in risk and compliance certification. So GSDC's Generative AI Risk and Compliance Certification is a lifetime validated certification, which comes with life learning resources, which is a lifelong learning. That is, you can study this certification all our self-paced mode. If you require any training for the certifications, you can connect to our training partners. We have 100 plus training partners as an channel network. Please let us know. The link is shared in the chat box. And we have over 100 plus generative AI certification in our portfolio. So you can check the full list of certifications on our website. The link is shared in the chat box. Any candidate, those who are certified with GSTC, will get a lifelong membership and complimentary upgrade to any GSTC certificate. Also, you'll be getting a free access to all these events. Something really important and exciting news for you all regarding our generative AI learners. We are launching our immersive learning program, which gives you best of both worlds. That is, you can get an access to a large collection of videos made by industry experts, which you can watch anytime at your own pace. Plus, every Saturday, you can join a live 2 hour of session with our industry expert. Here, you can ask questions directly and learn from the professionals. Further details will be provided to you over the email. So you can please get in touch with me. Email address is shared in the chat box. And here's a quick announcement. Before we end this session, we'll be having a 15 minutes of gamification session, and it will be held after the Q&A. So please stay till end, and the top winner will win a GSDC exam voucher worth $400, and top 3 winners will get published on GSDC Wall of Fame. And let me introduce you our keynote speaker, Mr. Richard Lawn, Field Fisher Senior Associate. A big welcome, Richard, from GSTC behalf. So Richard specializes in guiding clients through the complexities of global privacy, AI regulations, ensuring their operations align with the current laws and best practices. He works with a broad range of clients from startups to multinational corporations, helping them to navigate landscape of digital law. His expertise extend across key regulations such as the General Data Protection Regulation, UK Data Protection Act, California Consumer Privacy. He holds a dual qualifications as a lawyer in UK and California. Currently, he is advancing his knowledge in AI ethics through a master's degree at University of Cambridge. If you want to learn more about our speaker, the LinkedIn profile is shared in the chat box. So before we go further, post this speaker session, we'll be having a 15 minutes of Q&A session. So meanwhile, during this session, you can feel free to put your questions in the chat box. We will take all your questions during after the speaker session. So yes, Richard, you can take over the virtual mic ahead.
Great, thank you very much.
Yes.
I'll just share my presentation.
Yeah, sure.
Is that coming up on the screen?
Yes, it's coming on the screen.
Great, thank you very much. So yeah, just to start with a big thank you to Anjali and the rest of the GSDC team for inviting me to present today and to take part in this webinar event. I'm going to be talking about emerging regulations and laws governing generative AI, both the development and building of generative AI and also the use of generative AI. And I'm going to be talking about some of the most recent developments globally in terms of global regulation, but more specifically, I'm going to be talking about the laws in Europe, the EU and the UK, as well as the US. So Anjali already kindly provided an introduction on myself. Just to recap, my name is Richard Lawn. I'm a lawyer. I'm a senior associate at a law firm called Field Fisher. Field Fisher is a European law firm. We have our headquarters in London, but we have offices all over Europe. And we also have a satellite office in China and one in the United States in Silicon Valley. I work actually in Silicon Valley. I'm in California now. That's where I'm based. We're a full service law firm and we provide all sorts of different services to our clients, but I specialize in digital regulation and privacy law. And basically what that means is that I advise all sorts of different companies globally on their compliance with European and US digital regulations, including privacy laws like the GDPR and the CCPA, which some of you may have heard of, but increasingly on new emerging digital regulations around AI and other new forms of technology. So for today, I'm going to start with an overview of the current regulatory landscape for generative AI. Then I'm going to do a deeper dive on the laws in Europe and the US and the regulations that are currently in place. And then I'll finish by trying to put some of this in context and take some learnings away and how you can prepare for regulations and what you can do to comply. So really putting things into practice. Anjali says that I have an hour to speak and then I'll take questions at the end. So let's kick off with an overview of the regulatory landscape. And I'm going to begin with a quick recap on generative AI. Then I'm going to talk about the different types of laws and regulations that govern the development and use of generative AI. And then I'm going to give a quick snapshot of where we are around the world in terms of current regulations. So generative AI, we've all been hearing about it and many of us are already using it. And some of us might actually be involved in the development of generative AI as well, in terms of providing products and services to customers and users. But generative AI is really this new transformative technology. It's trained on vast amounts of data, including text, images, and other forms of data, often scraped from the internet. And it's capable of generating original content in a variety of forms and contexts. So most typically, it works by the user providing some form of prompt or input, a question maybe, or a query, or submitting a document or image. And then the AI will analyze that prompt or input and provide some form of output or response. Maybe it will answer your question, maybe it'll generate a summary of the document provided, or maybe it'll interpret the image that you provided. Some of the other unique characteristics of generative AI. So a single system can be used to perform a range of different tasks. Also, they often continually learn from new data and they acquire new capabilities as well. So with many of the consumer-facing AI we have today, that AI is learning every time we feed it a new prompt, we feed it a new input. It's analyzing that data, it's analyzing your question, and it's learning from it to continually grow and develop. And generative AI obviously has a number of different potential uses and applications. Notably, it helps with creative tasks because it can be used to generate text, generate images, etc. But for businesses, it also may improve efficiency. So it can help to streamline and automate processes and also handle scalable operations. So this is why so many companies around that are excited about the potential for generative AI because of its potential to save time and to streamline tasks and improve efficiencies within companies as well. And many of us are familiar with the commercially available generative AI tools today, things like OpenAI's ChatGPT and DALL-E, Google's Bard, Microsoft's Copilot, Anthropic's Claude. This is just to name a few of the consumer-facing tools out there. But increasingly, generative AI is also being incorporated into online and digital services, whether as standalone tools and capabilities, or as a technology that is incorporated into existing products and services and provides a new layer of capabilities. But of course, although generative AI has many benefits and opportunities, there are a number of risks and challenges. And firstly, these are potentially powerful tools that can be used for malicious or inappropriate purposes. So potentially somebody can use generative AI to generate fake content, things like deep fakes, which can be used to help spread misinformation. Or they can be used to commit fraud by impersonating somebody else because you can use generative AI to create emails impersonating somebody else or to create a likeness of somebody's voice without their consent and therefore commit fraud and other malicious activities. Other issues with generative AI, perhaps they may also inadvertently perpetuate or amplify bias, which can lead to unfair and unethical outcomes. So typically, AI is trained on very large data sets. And if that underlying data used to train the model reflects certain social biases and stereotypes, then those biases and stereotypes can also be reflected into the outputs of the AI as well. And so, for instance, in the real world, that can lead to unfair treatment in various contexts. For instance, in employment and hiring, or in finance and lending, or in law enforcement, etc. Depending on how the AI is used and the context in which it is used, particularly if it's used for decision making, those unfair biases can be reflected in any actions taken when relying on the technology. One of the biggest challenges as well for generative AI for businesses is keeping pace with the rapidly evolving regulatory landscape. And that's primarily what I'm going to be talking about today. Governments around the world and regulators around the world know about the risks and challenges of generative AI, and they are looking to introduce regulation. And this is happening very quickly. And so it's difficult for companies to keep up with changing regulations and to understand what their compliance obligations are. And failure to comply with those obligations can obviously lead to substantial fines and legal sanctions if you fail to comply. When we think about the scale of generative AI, the fact that it's becoming ubiquitous, that it's becoming layered into all sorts of digital products and services, then we have to think that it has a unique risk profile because of this level of scale. And a lot of the risk is also unknown as well. There are a lot of uncertainties and unknowns, which helps to amplify the potential harm. So that provides a little background on generative AI. Now we're going to move on to talk about types of regulation and governance around AI. And as a starting point, it's fair to say that this is a very broad church. There is lots of regulation out there. And I think we can put them into really four different buckets. The first bucket in the top left is specific AI regulations. So these are regulations and laws that are explicitly designed to address and regulate AI technologies, including generative AI. Now, it's fair to say that actually today there are relatively few dedicated AI laws, but the number is growing. The most notable around the world is the EU's AI Act. That's what I'm going to be talking about later. And that is a comprehensive law that quite ambitiously seeks to regulate AI through a risk-based framework. Other jurisdictions are considering the introduction of AI legislation as well. Some have already introduced targeted and more narrowly tailored AI regulations, while others are considering doing something similar to the EU and introducing a comprehensive framework. Moving on to the second bucket, we also have to think about indirect regulations. And what do I mean when I say indirect regulations? So these are laws that do not specifically or explicitly regulate AI. They might not talk about AI whatsoever. But when we're thinking about the use of AI in the real world, obviously there are many different laws and regulations that may indirectly regulate the development and use of AI. So to give you an example, there are data protection laws today. In Europe, we have the GDPR. In the US, we have laws like the CCPA, and these laws regulate the collection and use of people's personal data. And to the extent that generative AI involves the collection and use of people's personal data, perhaps in the form of training data, or perhaps in the form of the prompts and inputs for the AI systems, then those laws will indirectly regulate those AI systems because those AI systems are processing personal data. Another example, if you're using generative AI in the workplace for employment purposes, then you need to think about employment laws as well. There may be employment laws regulating how you go about recruiting people, the fact that you shouldn't discriminate against people based on certain characteristics when you are evaluating and monitoring employees, and workers may have certain rights under the law, which will be impacted if you're using generative AI. Similarly, there are consumer protection laws that protect consumers from unfair practices and that may require AI systems to be safe, reliable, and transparent when they're used in consumer-facing products. There are also IP laws, and this is a really interesting and a deep area as to how IP should apply to AI, particularly when this technology is new. And at the moment, we may not have clear guidelines or decisions from courts as to how IP applies to this type of technology, where it's generating original content, but the content is generated by a machine, not a human. Who owns the IP in the system? Who owns the IP in the output? And potentially, are you infringing upon somebody else's IP by producing output? So suffice it to say, there's a lot of law and regulation out there that can potentially indirectly regulate the development and use of AI. Now, I've been talking so far about hard laws and regulations, but we also have softer laws. And in the bottom left, we have ethical guidelines and frameworks. So these are non-binding frameworks and guidelines that are aimed at promoting the ethical use of AI globally. And probably the most notable example is the OECD's principles on AI. These principles that the OECD put out a few years ago, and they really seek to ensure that the use of AI is ethical, it's transparent, and it complies with human rights principles. And these principles have been affirmed in many different contexts by the G7 countries during the 2020 Hiroshima summit, by UNESCO, by the Africa Union, and the Council of Europe. Many different multilateral governments frameworks have either adopted similar principles to the OECD. In the bottom right, we also have self-governance and industry standards. So again, this is not hard law, this is not hard regulation, but these are voluntary standards and commitments that companies and industry bodies might publish. And here, just to provide you some examples, some of you may be familiar with these examples already. The NIST AI framework in the US. That's an industry standard that aims to provide a structured approach to managing AI risks. And it's intended for voluntary use by organizations that design, develop, deploy, or use AI products and services. And it aims to establish the importance of trustworthiness in AI systems, including aspects like fairness, accountability, transparency, etc. Another international standard that's been published more recently is the ISO 42001, and that sets out a number of specific requirements around establishing, implementing, maintaining, and improving an AI management system. So this is really designed for entities that provide or use AI-based products or services, ensuring the responsible development and use of those systems. So NIST, ISO, and other industry standards are emerging, and they really help organizations set out in a structured way how they're going to manage risks and opportunities. One other one I'll quickly mention here is the Partnership on AI. They published the Responsible Practices for Synthetic Media. And this is a framework specifically how companies can responsibly develop, create, and share synthetic media that has been generated or modified by AI. So it is targeted at the generation and use of generative AI specifically. And a number of companies have signed up to these responsible practices. That's something that's certainly worth checking out. Now, obviously, as a lawyer, I'm most concerned with the top half, the specific AI regulations and the indirect regulations. And for the remainder of today, we're really going to be focusing mostly on this top left bracket. So what's the current state of play around the world? This is just to give a little quick snapshot. So countries worldwide are designing and implementing AI governance legislation. And some of those efforts include introducing comprehensive legislation to deal with AI comprehensively, while some other countries are saying, well, we're going to introduce more specific and targeted regulation about certain types of AI and go after the most risky or most notable technologies, while some other countries don't think that they need to introduce any dedicated AI legislation at all, and instead are seeking to rely on their existing legislative frameworks. Really, there's no standard approach, and a lot is changing at the moment. So in the EU, in the top left, the EU has probably been the most pro-regulation in the world, and they're the first jurisdiction globally to introduce a comprehensive legislation governing AI. And that law is called the AI Act, and it was formally adopted this year, and it also came into force on 1st of August. So as I speak, this law is now in force. But as I will later discuss, most of its provisions are not in effect yet. So companies do not have to comply with its provisions yet. There will be a staged rollout of its requirements. And there are some rules in there around generative AI specifically. Now, the UK is slightly different. So in 2022 and 2023, the UK government said it supported a light touch and pro-innovative approach to AI, and therefore it would not be seeking to introduce AI legislation. So quite a different approach to the EU. And the UK also hosted the AI Safety Summit in November 2023. And the Prime Minister said at the time, the UK's answer is not to rush to regulate. However, things are changing, and recent reports indicate that the UK government is potentially looking to introduce AI regulation. We recently had the King's speech, and in that, the King confirms that AI regulation will be coming under the UK's new Labour government, but we don't have the details yet. The speech simply mentioned there will be certain requirements under a new AI bill that is going to be proposed by the government. So this is really a wait and see what the UK has to offer. The position in the US is somewhat different. So there is no current federal law that sets out comprehensive rules around AI in the private sector. We'll come on to talk about this a bit more depth later, but essentially there are some rules and regulations being introduced for federal government and federal agencies by the US government, but currently there is not one single overarching law for the private sector. In that absence, though, we have a number of US states that are looking to introduce their own rules. We've seen at least 2 states already introduce laws specifically targeting AI, and a number of other states are probably going to follow. So there is starting to be some regulation in the US, but it is more targeted and it is at the state level. Just to mention some other countries as well, China is introducing its own laws. So, for instance, the CAC and a number of other agencies in China, they have introduced the generative AI measures. And this is the first comprehensive AI regulation in China. And they encompass a wide array of subjects pertaining to the development and provision of generative AI services. And they're set to come into effect, I believe, next year or the year after. But there are some number of exceptions under this law. There are exceptions for research, academic institutions, public entities, etc. And it's also very, very specifically targeted to the use of generative AI within China and its use on Chinese citizens. So technologies that don't focus on the general Chinese public can enjoy a bit more flexibility. So a slightly different approach in China. They're introducing very targeted rules aimed at types of AI technologies, and we have this new law being introduced for AI. In India, some of you may be familiar with the recent developments in India. So there is a proposed Digital India Act. At this stage, it's just a proposal, and this will replace the current IT Act. And it would seek to introduce a number of rules around personal information, as well as the regulation of high-risk AI systems. I don't know much detail about the Act personally. I'm not an expert on Indian law, but I think that's certainly one to watch, and it'll be interesting to see whether we have new rules in India. At the same time, Brazil, they are following a similar approach to the EU. They put forward a comprehensive AI bill, which will set out a regime for AI more comprehensively. But again, this is just a proposal at this stage, and we're yet to see whether that will take root. Just very quickly, I'll mention some other jurisdictions in Asia. So Singapore is quite well known globally around its pro-innovation approach to regulating AI and its work with industry bodies. So Singapore is most recently set to publish an industry consultation, a set of guidelines for generative AI app development and deployment. And one of the things that these guidelines will require is safety labeling, so transparency to end users around generative AI to address risks such as misinformation and bias. And these guidelines are apparently going to be rolled out by the end of 2025 and will apply to all sectors, including the health sector and financial services. In tandem, the Singapore government has also proposed guidance on synthetic data, and that has been released, and a number of other initiatives by the Singapore government. There are also developments in South Korea and Hong Kong. So we're watching those jurisdictions closely as well. Now, suffice it to say, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of development. And it can be difficult navigating these requirements. It's difficult for lawyers like me to keep up with all of the changes, but it's also very difficult for companies to keep up and think about how they're going to comply with all of these laws in an effective and efficient manner. Well, there are some common themes coming out of the regulations and some principles that companies can think about. So, firstly, there is a really big push to ensure that AI is safe and robust. So, a lot of these rules are around addressing safety throughout an AI system's life cycle and requiring companies to identify and mitigate potential malicious uses of AI and taking steps to mitigate those uses. Another important principle, especially relevant for generative AI, is transparency. And this is a really vital aspect for generative AI, given the risks for the potential for inaccuracy or unreliable outputs or the spread of misinformation. So there are emerging standards around methods to detect AI-generated content, such as watermarking and other technical processes. And companies are also required to explain how they have trained the AI models using data, what data they have used, what data they've collected, and also explaining how people's data is used once the AI is deployed. So what data goes into the prompts and inputs, and how is the data used and processed, which third parties it's shared with. And this is really to ensure that people trust AI, they trust the systems, they trust their use of the data, and they also trust and can verify the outputs of the system as well. Relatedly, there are also rules being introduced around accuracy and fairness. So ensuring that the outputs of AI are accurate, that they are not inaccurate, that they don't perpetuate bias and harmful stereotypes, etc. So this is really rules placing the onus on companies using AI to check and verify the accuracy of the outputs before using or publishing the outputs of AI-generated content. Bringing some of this together is data governance. That's in the bottom right of the screen. And this ties in with many data protection laws and cybersecurity laws that are already in effect which really say that companies need to be responsible and accountable for how they are using data, ensuring that there is appropriate data privacy and security, and ensuring the integrity and quality of data inputs and data outputs. I'm going to jump over to the bottom left of the screen, individuals' rights. So individuals may already have rights under data protection laws and other laws today, things like the ability to access their data, the ability to correct their data, or the ability to request that a company delete their data. And some of these rights are going to be relative in a generative AI context as well. So can they see how their data has been used to train the AI? Do they have a choice over whether their data is used to continually fine-tune and improve the AI? Can they access their data, etc.? And also where the AI is used to make decisions about the individual, especially if there's automated decision making, what is the right for the individual to understand that the decision and potentially also to contest and challenge the decision as well? Another key focus for regulations around the world is human oversight. So the need for companies to ensure that they are not wholly reliant on automated processes, that there is some level of human oversight over these systems, which includes active monitoring, but it also includes auditing as well. And finally, in the middle, we have accountability. And really, this is the principle that ties everything together, because this means that companies have to be accountable and remain responsible for how they develop and use AI. And that I'm going to talk about a little bit more later in the last part of this session when we think about what types of mechanisms, policies, and processes can you put in place to ensure that AI is used compliantly with the law and also ethically as well. So moving on, I just want to quickly recap. I've been talking about dedicated AI regulations, but of course there are some new considerations under other laws as well when we're using generative AI. And this slide just provides some examples of some of the legal issues and concerns that we have to think about as lawyers and also as organizations and companies developing and using AI. So I've already mentioned with IP, intellectual property, there's a lot of uncertainty now in how AI technologies can be patented. Can these technologies actually be patented? If you're developing something, what's your ability to obtain a patent to protect the IP in that AI system? And that's going to vary depending on the jurisdiction. There's also the risk that any outputs of generative AI may inadvertently infringe existing patents or copyrights. So, for instance, if you're using generative AI, something like Microsoft's Copilot, to generate code that goes into your software, potentially, is it you actually copying code that exists elsewhere that somebody else has already written? And therefore you might be infringing somebody else's IP rights. Similarly, if you're producing text for marketing copy or something more creative, an image, are you potentially infringing upon somebody else's work? And also, there is the risk that AI systems may expose a company's trade secrets or confidential information in terms of learning from the data and providing outputs. So there are a lot of issues here around IP and the confidentiality of data as well. Employment, I mentioned some of the issues there, the potential for bias in hiring, promotions, and terminations, and legal concerns over how AI is used to monitor employees and to make automated decisions about employees as well. So this is really about ensuring there is appropriate human oversight and review of any AI decisions, outputs, recommendations, etc. So let's say that you are using AI to review CVs, or you're using AI to create a job posting. How are you going to ensure that those decisions and that generated content doesn't reflect any bias? Well, that's really going to need human review and oversight to make sure that that output doesn't contain any stereotypes or may inadvertently lead to bias in hiring practices. And also on screen, we have data protection and cybersecurity concerns. I won't go into those in detail, but suffice it to say, there are a lot of security issues relating to generative AI, particularly with things like model inversion attacks, where a bad actor may try to hack the AI system by getting it to reveal underlying data that was used to train the data, including people's personal information. It could ask the AI directly to provide the information, or it could use red teaming attacks to effectively extract information from the AI. Or people can use AI to impersonate others, which I mentioned earlier. There are also the risk that bad actors may be involved in data poisoning. And this is where you basically inject bad data into the training data, which confuses the model, and then it means that the model is unreliable. So cybersecurity is a big issue at the moment for generative AI. Some of the risks are unknown, both in terms of the nature of the risks and the scale of the risks. And so we're seeing a lot of focus now around how cybersecurity standards should be updated to take into account these novel risks. Right, so far I've been talking quite a lot about the overview of generative AI and how global regulations are emerging and the status and the current state of play. In the next part of this session, I'm going to be really focusing on Europe and the US. I think Europe's interesting because it is obviously a big market, but also because it is probably, many would agree, leading globally in terms of regulating AI. So many countries around the world look to Europe in terms of a leader for regulation and governance. And Europe has published this AI Act, which is the world's first comprehensive AI regulation. So it's important globally. It's also important to note that the law has extraterritorial effect, which means that it could also apply to non-EU companies, including those in Asia, Africa, South America, and elsewhere, who are offering products and services in the EU. And so therefore, it's important globally. And the US It's worth talking about the US as well because the US, as we're aware, is one of the countries leading the development of AI and is obviously an important market as well. So, um, I can't ask whether you've heard of the AI Act. I'm assuming that some of you have heard of it. Maybe you've read something about it, but this should just to provide you with a quick introduction, and then I'll come to talk about the specific rules for generative AI under the AI Act. So, the AI Act is a new EU regulation. As I say, it's in force and it is law today. And this is a law that will govern the development of use of AI in Europe. It's a risk-based framework, which means that it seeks to regulate AI generally, but really the rules are targeted at specific systems and practices. It focuses on the highest risk, and it's fair to say that, in fact, many applications and uses of AI are subject to very limited obligations under the regulation or are not really within scope at all. So it's very much a risk-based approach and targets specific types of AI. Its aim is to strengthen governance and also protect fundamental rights of EU citizens, as well as enforce safety standards. It categorizes AI systems according to 4 risk levels: minimal, limited, high risk, and unacceptable, and imposes a tiered structure with corresponding regulatory requirements. Apart from AI systems, it also establishes additional rules for general purpose AI models or GPAI models. What's a GPAI model? Well, effectively, that is a foundation model, frontier model, LLM, large language model. It's a model that is capable of general tasks and for general use cases. And typically, we're thinking about the largest models that are available, like GPT or Bard or Llama, these kind of really huge models that have been developed by the most cutting edge and leading AI companies in the world. And the EU has recognized that there are certain risks around these GP AI models, and therefore it introduces specific requirements for the developers of those models. Now, under the AI Act, it's fair to say that most of the obligations are imposed on the providers of AI systems and models, but there are some obligations for the deployers or the users of those systems as well. And if you're an importer or distributor, then there are some rules for you as well. It's also important to mention that the AI Act has certain exclusions. So there are, for example, exemptions for AI used for military purposes, and there is also a broad exception for the use of AI in a scientific research and development context. So really, the AI Act is addressing the highest risks, but the aim is not really to hinder development and innovation. So if AI is used for research solely, then there's a lot more flexibility. Here's the timeline. So today, it's still August 2024. It's the 30th today, so we're still just in August. The AI Act came into force this month. It was published in the official journal of the European Union. That means the law is on the books, but its provisions are not yet in effect. So companies don't have to comply with the rules yet. Instead, there's going to be a staged rollout of the provisions. So in February 2025, that is when the strictest prohibitions come into effect. So those unacceptable AI practices, those prohibitions come into effect February next year. In August 2025, that's when the rules for the GPAI models come into effect. Then a year later, in August 2026, looking ahead, that's when most of the provisions come into effect. So for our audience today, that's probably the date that you really have to think in mind in the EU, the August 2026 deadline. That's when the rules for high risk and limited risk systems come into place. But there is another deadline to be aware of. So August 2027, much further down the line in the future, if you are the developer of a pre-existing GPAI model, i.e. one created and existing before August 2025, Then you have longer to comply, and you don't need to comply with the rules until 2027. So really, this is a staged rollout intended to give companies some time to understand the regulation and take steps to comply. As I mentioned, there's a tiered approach to regulation. So at the top end, there are the prohibited practices. This includes the most dangerous or risky AI practices that are deemed unacceptable by the EU. Just to give you some examples, they include AI systems that deploy subliminal techniques beyond a person's consciousness to materially distort behavior in a manner that can cause harm, and also AI systems that exploit the vulnerability of specific groups of individuals based on age, physical, mental disability, etc. Naturally, these can cause high risks for individuals, and therefore they are prohibited. The EU is also going to ban social scoring. And social scoring is the practice of assigning a score to a person based on their behavior or characteristics, looking at their behavior over time, assigning a score to that individual that could be potentially used, leading to discrimination or other material detriment. And this is really to prevent AI being used to score and profile individuals over time and lead to harm and the detrimental treatment of people. There are also a prohibition on the use of real-time biometric identification by police and security as well. And that's specifically in the context of the public. So if there's a CCTV and there's a prohibition on police using CCTV to identify individuals in real time. Again, these prohibitions come into effect in February next year. Below that, we have the high-risk systems, and this is really where most of the rules under the AI Act fall. And there's a range of different systems that are considered high risk. There's actually an annex in the Act, and it sets out all of the different AI systems that are considered high risk. The European Commission can change that annex. It can introduce new AI systems that are considered high risk. Alternatively, it can take them out, depending on consultation and what happens over time. Generative AI does not fall within the high risk brackets. Just to give you an example of AI systems that do. So AI systems involved in the management and operation of critical infrastructure, such as traffic control, power supply, or critical digital infrastructure as well. If AI is used as a safety component, other examples include AI systems that determine somebody's eligibility for essential services, the use of AI by law enforcement or in judicial systems, the use of AI in an employment context, for employee selection or monitoring or decision making, and the use of AI in educational settings and for vocational training as well. So assessing someone's eligibility for education or their performance in an educational setting. Suffice it to say, there are a range of different contexts and use cases and scenarios where AI will be considered high risk. And where that applies, there are a range of different strict obligations that companies need to comply with. That applies both to the developers of those systems, and there are some rules for the users of those systems as well. I won't go into depth on those requirements. I don't have time. They're very lengthy, but suffice it to say, they're very onerous, and companies will need all the time they have to prepare to get ready for those requirements. Looking further down the list, though, we have limited risk AI, and this is where the rules for generative AI sit. So generative AI is generally considered more limited risk, and therefore the AI Act says, well, we're not going to impose the most strict obligations, but we are going to set out a number of transparency duties. And at the bottom end of the scale, we have minimal risk. Generally, AI systems that don't fall within one of the categories above, they're going to be considered minimal risk, and they are either outside scope of the Act or generally permissible. So let's talk about how the AI Act regulates generative AI. There are essentially 4 different areas. The first is it introduces rules for AI-generated content. The second are interactive systems or chatbots. So, for instance, a customer service chatbot or something else that's deployed on a website. There are also specific rules designed to target the risks around deepfakes and misinformation as well. And effectively, these rules are all based on transparency. And again, some of these obligations apply to the developers or the providers of generative AI, and some of them apply to the deployers or the users of generative AI. So when you're thinking about these rules, you also always have to think about, well, what's the role I'm playing? Am I actually providing this as a service to customers or to end users, or am I actually a user of this system myself? So the first requirement is that providers of generative AI systems must ensure that their outputs are marked or detectable as AI generated or manipulated. So basically, any AI generated content must be marked or detectable. So whether it's a piece of text or a media file, its artificial origins should be identifiable. And those providers also must ensure that their technical solutions are effective, interoperable, and robust. Moving on, chatbots. So for providers of AI systems that interact directly with people, something like ChatGPT or other kinds of consumer or user-facing chatbots, individuals must be informed they are interacting with an AI, unless this is obvious based on the circumstances. And in many cases, it will be obvious to an individual they're interacting with AI. But otherwise, there needs to be some form of disclaimer or notice to the individual that, in fact, they're not talking to a human. They might not be talking to a human customer service agent or representative. They're actually talking to AI. Moving on, there's also rules for deepfakes. So if you're a user or a deployer of generative AI, where the artificially generated or content may constitute a deepfake, then you have to disclose that the content has been artificially generated. What's a deepfake? Well, a deepfake is AI generated or manipulated image, audio, or video content that resembles a real person, object, place, or other entity or event, but it would falsely appear to be authentic or truthful. So basically, if an image looks real but it's not, then individuals have to be aware that it's AI generated. And again, there must be some form of notice, disclosure, or symbol on the content to alert the individual to the fact that it's AI generated. There's a similar requirement, not in terms of deepfakes, but for misinformation. So AI generated text that is used to inform the public on matters of public interest, that also has to include some kind of disclosure that the text has been AI generated or manipulated. And again, this is an obligation for the deployers or users of generative AI. I'll pause here because I think it's important to mention that the law sets out what you have to do, but it doesn't necessarily set out how you do that. So at this stage, we have these requirements under the AI Act, but it's unclear how companies are going to comply. How are providers going to develop a system that ensures that AI-generated content is detectable? And how can it ensure that those systems are robust, that they cannot be hacked, that watermarks cannot be erased, etc.? And the AI Act doesn't say how providers can do that. It simply says that this is the obligation. What we're expecting is that codes of practices and standards are going to be published and that there are going to be industry solutions. Some are going to be proprietary, and so the AI tech developers are going to come up with their own systems, whereas others might be standards that are developed for the entire industry and that others can use as well. We might not have all of those standards today. They are coming. But just as a reminder, these rules for generative AI under the AI Act, they're not in place today, but they're going to come into effect in 2025. So there is some time before we figure out the details. I don't have time to go through this, but there are some rules for generative models as well. Now, naturally, the AI Act is important because there are significant fines. So the largest fines are 7% of global turnover of a company, or 35 million euros for non-compliance with the requirements, or for other violations, for the less serious violations, including the non-compliance with the rules for generative AI, the fines are up to 3% of global turnover. So these are pretty hefty fines that can be issued by member state authorities in the EU. And there are also certain other actions they can take as well. They can also impose orders prohibiting the use or introduction of a certain AI application or system within the EU. They can also issue product recalls to say this is too dangerous or this is non-compliant, and therefore it needs to be recalled from the market. I just want to spend a few minutes talking about the US, and this is a slide which has a lot of information on it. But I'll just pick up a few things on this slide, but the overriding point is that today there is no overarching federal law in the US that governs artificial intelligence in the private sector. The US government has introduced some rules for government agencies and bodies. So the White House issued its executive its executive order on AI. And that was issued earlier this year, and it's aimed at numerous sectors and ensuring that AI is used for good. But it's really focused on federal agencies and mandating the development of federal standards. Otherwise, there is also the, let's see if it's on the slide. It should be there somewhere. I can't see it, but the White House also issued a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. This is a non-binding piece of law, but sets out a number of principles for AI developers and users to help guide the use development of automated systems, including addressing things like algorithmic discrimination. But I will say that's a non-binding piece of law. It is voluntary. So really the picture is that at the federal level, we don't yet have a comprehensive law. There are some attempts to introduce legislation. So you'll see there's a number of draft legislation on the slide there, including most notably the Algorithmic Accountability Act. That is still just a proposal. It's in draft form, and it's very unclear whether it's going to go all the way to becoming a concrete law. There have been multiple attempts to introduce laws so far, and most of them have failed. So there's no guarantee that we're going to have a federal law in the private sector anytime soon. In the absence of federal law, though, however, US states are introducing their own laws. And in fact, states are becoming increasingly active. So just to give you some examples, Colorado has signed into law a bill concerning consumer protection in interactions with AI. And that provides a risk-based AI regulatory framework similar to the AI Act, but it only applies within Colorado. Similarly, Utah has enacted the AI Amendments Bill, which focuses on a consumer protection where a person uses prompts or otherwise causes generative AI to interact with people. So focusing on interactive chatbots and other generative AI. And also Tennessee has introduced rules around ensuring the likeness, voice, and image security. So combating the rise of AI-generated voices and fake recordings. Suffice it to say, there are a lot of new laws under the states. Some have come into law, some are still at the draft stage. We're going to see many, many more laws in the US, but they're typically more targeted. And let's compare the two jurisdictions. So in the EU, we have this comprehensive and harmonized regulation that I've been talked about. It sets out pretty strong protections for individuals, and it really focuses on fundamental rights. The US is different. We're seeing a very diverse, emerging patchwork of state privacy laws, and typically they have a narrower focus, and they are focused more on protecting consumers or focusing on particular sectoral issues, for instance, in health or finance, rather than the use of AI generally. So we're seeing a very different approach in the EU compared to the US. So I just have a few minutes left in the presentation, and I'm going to be talking through how you can put some of these things into practice. So thinking practically, I think when we're approaching any type of regulation, it's important to understand your role. And here, these are the 4 basic roles that you could be playing. These are not terms necessarily used by any single regulation or law. So these are just terms that I'm using to describe your role with respect to generative AI. So firstly, you might be a developer. You might be the entity that designs and trains the underlying AI model or system. naturally, you're probably going to be subject to more onerous obligations under AI regulations because you are the one building the AI. Alternatively, you could not be the original developer, but you might be somebody further downstream in the supply chain, but you are involved in improving a third-party AI model or system. So maybe you are adapting somebody else's model using your own proprietary code, or maybe you are fine-tuning a third-party model with your own training data. In that context, even though you didn't originally develop the AI model or system, you are improving it, you are making adjustments and changes, and therefore you're probably going to be subject to more onerous obligations. Another version is an integrator. So this is somebody who doesn't develop the model or the system, and they don't even make any changes or adaptations. They merely integrate it into their own product or service that is provided to others. So if you think about it, if you use an API that connects with, for instance, GPT or another third-party model, and you will rely on that model within your product or service to provide a service to others, you are simply integrating that third-party model. Now, even though you didn't design that AI model, maybe you're not directly responsible for training, developing, or improving that model. You don't even have any control around the data that's used to train the model. But by integrating it, you might pick up a number of compliance obligations. So this is another one important area to think about. And actually, many people today are caught as integrators rather than the original developers. And then further downstream in the AI supply chain, we have users. So these are people who are merely using third-party AI systems for their own internal purposes. And that captures most today. We know most are now starting to use generative AI. If you're not using it today, you will be soon. It's becoming ubiquitous. Users are generally subject to fewer obligations under the law, but they will have direct responsibility under other laws that I mentioned earlier. What are some of the strategies for mitigating risk? Well, this slide sets out a three-pronged strategy. And what it really focuses on are mapping, measuring, and managing. And some of this terminology might be familiar to you if you know NIST and other industry standards that set out a more structured response. And basically, mapping begins with identifying and understanding the various risks and obligations associated with the AI. So this is understanding, number one, what AI are we using and developing? Understanding what our role is with respect to that AI system. Are we the developer of that system? Are we the user of that AI system? Understanding the risks associated with each of those AI systems, and also understanding the legal and regulatory obligations that may apply, depending on where you are, and also depending on where you're offering and using that system as well. You have to begin with mapping to understand both the risks and your obligations. The next is measuring. So once you understand your role and your obligations, you also have to measure the potential risks and measure the extent of your obligations under the law. So this includes things like conducting thorough risk assessments to understand the likelihood and impact of each identified risks. It also includes monitoring your AI systems to detect deviations or emerging risks, and to evaluate the effectiveness of your risk mitigation measures. It also includes things like auditing, to conduct periodic audits to make sure that generative AI systems are used effectively, accurately, and that the outputs of those systems continue to be reliable and safe. So really, this is around initial measurement, but ongoing measurement as well. And lastly, we have management, which is ensuring that you've developed the underlying policies and processes to manage those risks that you've identified. That includes things like implementing an effective incident response plan and also training all of your employees as well on how they should be using generative AI and what are some of best practices as well. All of this is part of accountability or governance to understand that AI companies, whatever your role is, should be accountable and are responsible for how they are developing and or using generative AI. So to conclude, Basically, your strategy for managing the risks around AI requires a comprehensive approach, and governance acts as the glue that hangs all of these strategies together. This is our last slide that I'm going to show you today, and then we'll wrap up for questions. So you can take this away. I'm not sure if the slides are going to be circulated afterwards, but they're on screen now. Here are some practical steps that you can take to prepare for some of these upcoming regulations. The first is to always consult with stakeholders. Understand who you need to be speaking with in the company, both internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. This generally will require consulting with the legal team, but maybe also, if you're a member of the IT team, cybersecurity, product, engineering, etc., everyone has a role to play with respect to mitigating the risks of AI. I already mentioned understanding your role in the AI supply chain. Are you the developer, an improver or integrator, or a user? Understanding and considering your legal obligations, as well as any commitments you've made to customers and users, and then conducting appropriate due diligence around the technology, particularly if you are outsourcing some of this or you're buying in third-party technology. And lastly, we're talking about managing and measuring, so implementing the necessary changes at the organizational level. And lastly, ensuring that once the AI goes live, you're conducting audits and monitoring updates. Naturally, all of this needs to be revisited on a periodic basis because regulatory environment is changing. There are new laws and regulations coming into effect, and more regulation is on its way. So one of the challenges for the legal team is to understand how the new legal requirements will impact how AI is developed and how it is used within your organization. So thanks very much for your time. I hope you found that interesting and helpful. Here's my contact details on screen. If you want to connect on LinkedIn, please send me an invite. The QR code is there, or you can type in my name and find me on LinkedIn. Very happy to connect. Whether you want to talk about AI generally, if you want to talk about the ethics of AI, or if you actually need any legal advice in Europe, the US, or elsewhere, Phil Fisher and myself very happy to help. And Anjali, I believe we have a few minutes maybe for questions. I'm not sure if we've had any questions come in.
Yes, we have some questions, Richard. First of all, I'd like to thank you. It was very insightful session and very informative for our audience. So I would like to ask you some questions from the audience. That is, a question is from Mr. Sunil J. That is, thank you, Richard, for the great presentation. And the question is, can you share your opinion with the EU Act have a Brussels effect similar to GDPR?
It's a great question. So for people who are not familiar, the Brussels effect basically describes the situation where Brussels, as the legislative heartland of the EU, issues a law, and that law is then either it either inspires or reflected in other countries. And also that law kind of has an indirect impact around regulation globally. And I think the AI Act will have a form of Brussels effect, yes, but I think it will be more limited than the GDPR. So with the GDPR, what we saw was the EU introducing the first comprehensive regulation for data protection around the world. Many countries looked at that model and adopted their own similar law. We have the Brazil, Turkey, even China now with PIPL, many countries around the world introducing a law that is a little bit similar to the GDPR. Maybe it's very similar, maybe it's less similar, but something like the GDPR. Even here in California, we now have a CCPA, which is inspired by the GDPR. I think the AI Act will have a similar effect. Many countries will be grappling with the same issues and will be looking at the EU and saying, well, they've introduced this risk-based framework. We are going to adopt the same model. And we are already seeing that effect. We are seeing it, for instance, with Brazil. Their bill for AI is quite similar to the EU and kind of inspired by what the EU has been doing. However, I don't think all countries are going to take this approach, and some countries have already said, actually, we don't think that we need comprehensive AI legislation, or we're going to be more targeted. And the reason I think it's going to be different with AI is because many countries are worried of over-regulation, and they want to ensure that they continue to support AI innovation and development. And they're worried that something that they, like the AI Act, will stifle innovation within their country. So I think will be slower to see similar approaches, and some countries won't take the same approach. I think it's also very unlikely that the US will introduce something similar.
Mm-hmm. Yes, hope this answers the question. So next question we have again from Sunil Chit itself. So can you share what is the importance of indirect regulations on environment with regards to AI, noted on IP and confidentiality, employment, data production, protection, and cybersecurity?
So the question of the importance of indirect regulation, I think it's very important today because we exist in a world today where there isn't much regulation specifically regulating AI. I've talked about the AI Act and some of the new regulations coming in, but all of this is new and a lot of it is not enforced yet today. So before we actually have these specific rules, we really need to think about, well, what other law is generally applicable today: employment, human rights law, IP, etc. One of the challenges is that it's difficult to understand how these laws apply to something that is as novel and complicated as generative AI. So we don't necessarily have clear answers yet on how these laws apply. And so we are waiting for court decisions, and we are waiting for guidance from regulatory bodies as to how the law should be interpreted and applied with this technology. But it gets very complicated. And just to give you an example, data protection, that is kind of like the de facto legislation and regulation of AI today in the absence of AI regulation. And data protection is all about the processing of personal data. But what does it mean for somebody to request access to their personal data held in an AI model? AI models don't generally store or retain personal data, but they are capable of producing information about people. So what does it mean that somebody should be able to access, correct, or delete their data that can be produced by an AI model? That's a very difficult question to answer, and the law wasn't built to answer that question. So it's interesting for lawyers, it's interesting for courts and regulators, but we don't have a clear answer on some of these questions yet. So it's very important because that's the law as it applies today, but it's also important because there's a lot of uncertainty for businesses and organizations as to how they can ensure compliance with these laws as they stand today.
Mhm. Yes. Next question is from Mr. Odumai. So where is the place of GDPR in AI and AI applications?
Great question. And that definitely follows on from what I was just saying. So GDPR regulates the processing of personal data. And as I've been discussing, the GDPR is an EU regulation, but there are similar laws in other countries, other data protection laws. And the role that data protection law plays is that to the extent that an AI system or model involves processing people's personal data, then that AI system is basically governed by data protection law and the GDPR. So, for instance, how has people's personal data been collected and used to train AI? And once the AI is deployed, how is people's personal data collected and processed by the AI system? So, what is your legal basis for collecting the data? Have you obtained appropriate consent to use people's data for these purposes? What transparency has been given to people, and what rights do people have? And you think about this, and let's say we're talking about something like ChatGPT. How was that application trained? We know that it was trained using vast amounts of data from the internet, including information that's publicly available about all sorts of people. from LinkedIn and from other websites. What was the legal basis to collect people's personal information? And what rights do we have around the use of our data to train these new AI models? The GDPR is becoming a very active tool for regulators in Europe. And we've already seen a number of European regulators, data protection regulators, taking action against companies for the development and use of AI. So that includes the Irish Data Protection Commissioner, it includes Italy's Garante, it includes France's CNIL. All of these regulators are looking at the GDPR and AI and thinking, how do these rules apply? And how are companies ensuring that they're complying with laws like the GDPR when they're using AI? So GDPR at the moment plays a very, very important role in regulating AI.
Mm-hmm. Yes. We'll just take last two questions, Richard, because we are running out of time. So one question is from Miss Rosalind. That is, how can African governments ensure that AI regulations protect citizens' data privacy and security?
Sorry, Anjali, can you just repeat that question from Rosalind?
Yeah. So how can African governments ensure
Ah,
that AI regulations protect citizens' data privacy and security?
I think that's a really interesting question. So you mentioned that I personally have just completed a master's in AI ethics at the University of Cambridge. And as part of that program, the University of Cambridge, a delegation, we went to Kenya and we were speaking with government officials, organizations, charities, and other academic institutions in Kenya around how AI is being used and developed in the country. It's extremely interesting, all of the work in Kenya around AI, but also Africa more generally. And one of the conversations was how a country like Kenya and the African continent more generally should be introducing rules around AI. And I think my takeaway and what I learned from that trip was that Africa has its own considerations, its own regulatory requirements, issues, its own cultural factors, its own economic factors. And adopting a similar model to Europe and other countries is one possible avenue, but it's not necessarily the most appropriate avenue. And many people in Africa think that they need to develop their own rules and their own systems for governing AI. And I think it's interesting to see how African governments will legislate AI. But my understanding is that at the moment, many are kind of waiting because they want to see, well, we don't quite fully understand AI yet. We don't fully understand the risks. And we're also worried of introducing rules that are too strict or onerous. So we want to see and respond and see what works for Africa. And I think for me, that is quite a sensible approach. They don't want to lead too early by introducing rules that are inappropriate or too strict. They want to have a little bit of time to understand and consult with individuals and organizations.
Mhm. Yes. So last question, Richard. So this question is asked by Mr. Govindarajan. So if I construe that privacy legal compliance has significant independence on EU AI Act in the EU geography, is it the right understanding, Richard?
Yes. Sorry, can you repeat the question again? I just want to make sure I fully understand.
Yeah. So if I construe that privacy legal compliance has significant dependence on EU AI Act in the EU geography, is it the right understanding?
Yes, I think they are. I think privacy and the AI Act are two separate things, but they are interrelated. We have a whole regulatory regime that governs data protection and privacy. That's the GDPR and other laws. We also have the AI Act that specifically governs AI. But obviously, there's a huge amount of crossover between those two things. And The AI Act talks about data governance. It talks about protecting people's privacy. So there's absolutely a lot of crossover and overlap and dependency between the two. Naturally, there are some AI systems where privacy is less relevant. So if you think about AI that might be used to analyze deforestation or the environment, financial markets, there are lots of AI which don't necessarily involve privacy concerns. But there's a lot of AI which does involve people's personal information and therefore involves data protection and privacy issues. And I think that's especially relevant for generative AI because generative AI is about text, it's about images, it's about video, it's about interactions with people. And so a lot of generative AI is about us, and therefore privacy becomes relevant. There are two separate regimes in the EU for privacy and for AI, but they are absolutely connected.
Yes, thank you
I hope
so
that
much.
answers the question.
Yes, yes, it answers all your questions. So thank you very much, Richard. It was very like informative session, and also it interacted well with the like we have many questions from our socials as well. So they'll get back to you over the email regarding the same. So before we move forward with the gamification session, so Richard, would you like to add any last statement to this webinar?
Just to say thank you again to Anjali and to GSDC. Thank you for everyone for attending. I hope that this has been interesting. This is just to kind of give an introduction and an overview. If you have any questions, feel free to follow up on LinkedIn or by email. Very happy to answer them. And it would be great to connect with some of you. I'm based in California, but I love to connect with people around the world, especially Asia, Africa, or wherever you may be. So thanks for your time today. And I hope you enjoy the gamification session too. That sounds fun.
Yeah, great. So, yes, everyone, please stay connected with us. We'll soon start with the gamification session. So, I would like to welcome my colleague, Miss Setulu, like to take this forward ahead.
Thank you, Anjali. Thank you for the time. And thank you so much, Richard, for that amazing session. It was such an enlightening session. And hope that we can connect with you again for another time. So, Richard, if you have time with you, please feel free to play this game with us, along with us. All right, so to everyone here, I have shared the gamification link and session ID on the chat box. Please have a look. I'm sure many of you have played yesterday and the other session as well. So you know the drill. You can go ahead and sign up or log in to your existing account. For those who are new, you can go ahead and sign up. You can see on my screen how it will be appearing. So on the sign up screen, you will be entering your first name, last name, and also the session ID. Please make sure that you enter the exact session ID. You have to enter your first name and your correct first name and last name as well, so that in case you win, we will be able to connect with you. If your email is not working, you can always use a dummy email in order to play this game. It doesn't matter, but just your name has to be correct. So for today, as you keep on signing up or joining this game, let me explain what game we'll be playing today. We'll be having a game of puzzles. So of course, everyone knows how we do the puzzles, but for this game, what you will be doing is you will be adjusting a puzzle while also answering the questions that we have. So you will receive around 9 questions for this, and you'll get 2 minutes to answer all the questions. You will be finding a final picture at the end if you answer all the questions correctly. If not, you can guess what the picture is. So while you are all signing up, let me just check the lobby here to see how the sign up is going on. All right, so I see some of you have already joined. The link is on the chat box. You can click on it and enter the session ID. In case you are not getting the game that we have prepared for the day, please check the date, 30th July. If you are not getting this game, you can just click on your right-hand side profile and click on assign new session ID and enter the session ID, that is 1889. Yes, you can answer the questions in any order. The points will be there. According to the points, you can answer it, and you will get the points if you get it correctly. Also, please do not refresh your browser while playing the game, as that would refresh the whole game for you, which we do not want. Also, we want to give a quick shout out to Novel Vista, our partner Novel Vista, who has helped us in developing this platform, the gamification platform. If you are interested in finding more of such games in your learning, then you can reach out to us, to any of our learning advisors. You can connect with us, and we'll be happy to guide you. So I'll give it another few minutes before we start the game, and we'll begin shortly. If you're having any issue, please, you can leave your queries on the chat box. I can answer it for you. For those of you who are watching live, you will find the link on the comment box, so you can check that as well. You can join us here. If you want to see your name on the lobby, you can check the Zoom screen again. I'm sharing the lobby screen here. All right. Okay, you're not able to create an. Okay. What you can do is you can sign up with a dummy account. Just make sure that your name is correct. On the email address, you can just just use a dummy account like testing123@gmail.com and such. You can enter that, and you can enter the game. You can click on play in order to join the lobby. Click on play. So if you see this game, this should be the game that you see. Puzzle RNC 30 July. If this game you are not seeing on your screen, then just click on your right hand side profile and enter the session ID. Assign new session ID. Please check your Zoom screen right now as I'm showing how you can enter it. Geraldine, I hope you are able to follow through here. I'll give it another few more minutes until you can join. You have to enter the session ID 1889. Yes, Olumide, you have to enter the session ID 1889 in order to get this game. Please click on your right hand side profile and click on assign new session. If you are signing up, you can directly enter 1889 and you will get the game. If you have any questions regarding yesterday's quiz, you can just email us. We'll be happy to help you there. All right, so just a few more seconds and I will start the game, as we are running a little bit out of time. If in case you missed this out, then we are very sorry, but you can always try again. We have another session coming up, so you can try in that as well. All right, so you have to click on the play button. There is a play button. Just click on that and you will enter the lobby. If you are not seeing the game for today, that is 30 July, just click on the right hand side profile, your profile, and you will find the option assign new session. You have to enter the session ID there, that is 1889, 1889, and then you will find the game, and then click on play. Okay, so time is running out, so I will start the game in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And we have started the quiz. You can check your screen for the game. It has started now. You have 2 minutes for this. I have already started the timer, and I will give you the countdown of how the time is going on. I see some of you have started playing. You should quickly start playing now. There is a $400 Word voucher, exam voucher on stake here. One of you will win that. Also, a quick information that we have our interactive learning sessions coming up. So if you are interested to learn more about that, you can reach out to us. We have left our email addresses on the chat box. You can just connect with us, or you can just connect with us on LinkedIn as well, and we'll be happy to tell you more about the sessions. Also, you will be getting information about it on your registered email ID that you have registered for this session. All right, we have around 1 minute left. Do hurry up. I see that Govindaraj is on the scoreboard, on top of the scoreboard right now. So if you are behind, do hurry up as the time is clicking on. If you have the same score, the winner will be based upon the one who has answered the fastest according to the time. I believe there will be a lot of people who have the same score. So according to how much time you have taken to answer the question, you will be rewarded according to that. So you have 20 seconds left. I will do the countdown at 10. There is Rajarshi at top right now, and some are still playing. You can try your best to defeat this score. All right, I'm doing the countdown now in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. That's the end of the quiz. And let's see who are the winners. Yes, congratulations, Rajarshi. You have won this game for today. And also congratulations to Mohammed Salim and Jonil Sun for scoring second and third. You will be also listed on our wall of fame. Can I request any one of you from the three winners here to unmute yourself and share about your takeaways from the game?
Hey, hi everybody.
Hi, Rajeshi. How was your experience?
Yeah, it's a great experience and a great learning in the session also. And thanks, Richard, for the session also.
Amazing.
And
And how was the session today?
yeah, it's a great session. I learned a lot on that acts and regulations and laws.
Amazing. Great. Thank you so much for sharing. We will get in touch with you for all the deeds after this. All right. So
Thanks.
thank you so much to everyone for playing as well. And if you have missed out today, don't worry. We'll have more sessions. So you can always reach out. You can always come back again and play this. So I'll leave my time here to our colleague Anjali, to our host. And yeah, we'll see you again next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Setulu, for this fun-loving gamification. Yes, so just yes, we have our upcoming sessions on 21st and 22nd of August. That is GSDC Global Agile ITSM Webinar 2024. So everyone stay connected with us on our socials for more updates. Please do follow us on our LinkedIn groups. Please do follow us on our LinkedIn groups. Also, please give us the feedbacks and key takeaways on the Trustpilot. Also, if you need to visit our website for the more details, you can get back to on the GSDC Council website. Also, join our exclusive community LinkedIn groups. And thank you very much for attending these sessions, and stay connected with us for more such amazing upcoming sessions ahead. Thank you.